I'm Tony Preston, the author at IntegrativeWorks. I'd like to talk a little bit about the website, what will be available to the public, what has moved to Patreon at different levels of membership, and how that might be useful. We've gone to Patreon because we'd like both better support and better feedback about the materials and what's useful for people and what else we can develop that would be more useful. Let's go through the site real quick. This is the site here, IntegrativeWorks. It has two main sections, resources for people in pain and resources for massage and body work. The resources for people in pain have a few main sections. The first section are myofascial pain patterns. This post over here is one of those myofascial pain pattern posts. They go through and describe the pain pattern and how it looks for people, including an illustration of what the trigger point pattern is. It talks about both what research says and what I experience in my own clinic. As well, it talks about how people activate or intensify the pattern. So this is what you might do that originally created the problem, or what you're continuing to do that keeps it from solving itself or aggravates it. There are some other sections. The next one would be this section on self-care. Here's a self-care post. This self-care post goes through and talks about activities you should avoid or change that might be aggravating it until you get this problem fixed or rehabilitated. As well, it talks about some things you might do for temporary relief. You might use this pain patch or do this icing routine, etc. Then it goes on to say, here are some stretches and exercises you can do so that you can get longer lasting relief. This is classics tricep stretch here. I go through on those and explain them usually in detail, and at the end, I talk about ice and stretch and how that might be more effective. There's a yoga corner. This talks about poses that either aggravate this trigger point or can be used to help relieve this trigger point. As well, if we look over here, for people, there are conditions and syndromes, as are simply list of posts that are associated to a certain condition, maybe a thoracic outlet or a frozen shoulder, or you might have one on dizziness or eye pain or something like that. There are also cases in history. Cases in history talk about either interesting cases I have or things that have happened historically that have changed the therapy. This post here is about a person with hyperexplexia that has migraines from headaches. This post here is about a golf shoulder problem that happened to be best solved with integrative craniomuscular. Here's a post about Hancock's craniosomatic version of craniosacral, as opposed to this post on traditional osteopathic biomechanical cranial. And these go on. There are posts about other techniques, and this is a post about the book that I wrote back in the mid-90s for the massage school. There's a post about my wife complaining about not being able to wear her shoes because her foot hurts and how we worked on that. That takes us on to resources for massage and body workers. These resources are more in depth, they're more professionally oriented, and so most of them require a Patreon membership. There is anatomy and body work. Here's an anatomy post. I go through and offer traditional anatomy information with origin, insertion, function, that sort of stuff. I have these illustrations that I've put in that have the origin bone in blue and the insertion bone in green, and then bones that are trapped in the middle, either in a teal or a tan color, depending on how they're involved. That's visually really helps to understand the anatomy. I then have a section on more details in the attachments and the function and the anomalies of the muscle. And then there are related posts. This related post section is particularly interesting. If you're a therapist, it lists all of the posts related to, in this case, triceps. There are routines on the work from the workbook of classical neuromuscular therapy. Um, those routines are available to the public. They're straight out of the book. They go through and offer exactly what was in the books from it was used to teach therapists for 16, 18 years. It's great detail on exactly where to put your hands and what to do. It is taken from uh, St. John's work. It was adapted out of that and then tailored toward the school that I wrote this for. That work, however, isn't as effective or quick or long lasting as integrative neuromuscular. Integrative neuromuscular is the idea of taking the idea of trigger points and neuromuscular and then adding in front of that a structure that makes your treatment more effective and longer lasting. Let's take a look. There is connected to that. Here's some therapist notes for triceps. It goes through and says, let's look at the anatomy. Here's some tests you can run to tell if that is part of the problem. And then it goes through treatment sequencing. And this is part of integrative work that makes everything work better. It says these trigger points are predicated on these joint problems and these certain vertebral issues. And therefore, there's a sequence here that I can go through where I treat the system before I get around to directly working on the muscle that makes the release of the muscle longer lasting, more effective, easier for the therapist, less painful for the patient, etc. On those posts as well, there's almost always an idea about self-care, either that you need to follow through with a therapist needs to follow through with the patient on, or that simply refers to the self-care post so the patient can have a home program. Next, there is this section on craniosacral and TMJ. The TMJ portion is taken from integrative neuromuscular and moved into the craniosacral section because it's more complicated and intricate. It also pairs very well with craniosacral work. Anyone who's learned the integrative craniomuscular work would say that the craniosacral work really facilitates the release in TMJ, makes the whole process much more successful and much faster to resolve. Let's take a look at some of the materials that are going into that section. There was a book called Transition to Integrative Bodywork. It is the manual for the course that kind of helps move the therapist from regular neuromuscular to integrative work. It goes through and talks about principles, some traditional principles like Davis Law and Hilton's Law, but some other integrative principles like a hierarchy of governors, integrative and symptomatic techniques, a framework for integrative therapy, all about direct, indirect technique, and some other things that begin to move us toward craniosacral. In addition, there's a book on vault decompression. It's the next step in cranial work. It goes into an overview of the craniosacral system, detail on anatomical structures, physiological patterns like flexion, extensions, torsions, lateral strains, those sort of things in cranial physiology. And then it has a section of decompression techniques. Next, there is a book on vault sutures. It doesn't have as much background information because that was in the decompression book. It has information on how to do sutural work in the vault. And then with that, there is facial releases, which goes along with the TMJ very well. Next, there are SBS patterns, and SBS patterns are specific patterns involved in the sphenobasilar mechanism of the cranium, or this section here highlighted in yellow and purple. Those patterns are key for releasing um, lasting postural issues in the cranium. So this covers the basics of craniosacral and TMJ. The next piece is integrative craniomuscular. This, for me, is the juice of therapies. It really goes out there and allows you to make changes from the cranium that govern patterns in the body, so that you can make postural changes and release trigger points by doing cranial work. That comes from this book on sustaining governor releases and from the craniosacral sections, where it begins to show joint correlations and which parts of the cranium connect to which parts of the body. This is the highest level and is, fairly advanced work. Um, that kind of covers the website. That all of these pieces will be on Patreon. This at the integrative neuromuscular level, this at the craniosacral and TMJ level, this at the integrative craniomuscular level. As well, on Patreon, there will be additional pieces that are added that are not in the manuals or on the website, like this picture of the biceps and how it weaves into the shoulder, so that subscapularis weaves under coracobrachialis and the long head of biceps, the short head of biceps, but then lays over the top of the long head of biceps, as well as some other pieces that are at play there. Those will, in addition, be available on Patreon. I hope that answers some questions about how the website works, what information will be moving to Patreon. I'd love to get your feedback. Send me an email or a message through Patreon, or through the link on the website. Thanks for your time.